So to me, when I'm riding, it's a big thing actually to my life because it's all I've ever known from 4 years old, 4 years of age. It's like an escape, not in a negative way, but it's an escape to a place where nothing really matters, and your focuses that usually control your day, shall we say, ups and downs, kind of disappear. So to me, it's quite therapeutic actually. Anything else that's going on at the time just doesn't matter. It's been mentally challenging at times, like just getting hurt, and nowadays having time off work and stuff like that concerns me a little bit sometimes. That's like the negative side of the sport and the dangers, but also like the pressures that you kind of inflict on yourself as a rider because you're quite serious. I find myself quite serious with what I'm doing, so I put added pressure on myself. It's a balance between the two, the negatives sometimes, but the positives outweigh it all, and that's why I'm still doing it now at 33.
So when I met Josh, he was still at a professional level, which obviously consumes a lot of time and energy and effort from his perspective. So in terms of my lifestyle change, I think it was just as far as our relationship went, when it came to making the effort, I think there was a bit more there that I had to contribute, just to kind of meet Josh at where he was at the time. As things have progressed and we now live together, that obviously shifts and changes. But yeah, if it's something that I want to be a part of and support him with, it does almost become a lifestyle choice. So there's a lot of weekends, especially during the summer, traveling, leaving on a Friday, coming back on a Sunday night. But as someone who really enjoys being outdoors and around people anyway, it was a lifestyle change that I was happy to make, because I really enjoy the atmosphere. I really enjoy being able to support Josh. And yeah, if anything happens, it's just peace of mind knowing that I'm there and I can help him or look after him, or just be that extra team member when things are difficult.
Talk to me about some of the lows of them injuries that you mentioned.
I remember my first injury. I was about 11 years old. I actually fractured no, it wasn't that injury. Sorry, I've got mixed up. I've had a few. It was a tibia on the back of my leg. And I think that was just the first incident where it was like, this sport can actually hurt quite a lot. I just remember how the crash happened. It was such a small little incident. It was nothing, but the weight of the bike landed on me and fractured my leg. And I know I couldn't finish the race, but in my head I was thinking, we'll rest up, speaking to my dad about it. We'll try again tomorrow. That was like a moment where it's like, this sport isn't just all sunshine and rainbows. I've got to have X amount of weeks off now, and missing the bike at that age because I used to ride at least twice a week and stuff like that. So that was like kind of like planted a seed, just thinking, I hope this doesn't happen again. So you're kind of battling that, I think, at a young age. Sure enough, a couple of years later, probably the other leg happened, I think it was. But the bad one, the one that shook me a little bit, was a vertebrae. It was the lower neck. C7, I think it's called. And it was a high-speed crash, air ambulance. There was a TV crew there, helicopter heroes. I was on telly for a while. And it was like I was off for a few months then. And I think what I realised is that at that point, how much I do love the sport, because even though the injury could have been far worse, obviously could have been really, really quite bad. It wasn't ideal, as in a neck colour for a few months, but it made me think after a month or two, I was just dying to get back on the bike again. And I thought that was quite powerful actually, because it was like, if I can go for a broken neck, that could have been life-threatening, but luckily wasn't. And I really want to get back on the bike. That's telling me that I've chose the right sport. Yeah, it's just a roller coaster of emotions, I think, with injuries, and some downs, some ups, and excitement. You find a love again, I think, sometimes when you have a bit of time off. I think that's across everything, really, not just riding, just work commitments. If you have a break, have a holiday, you're excited to get back. So, yeah, there's a lot of feelings and emotions at different times throughout my racing.
Have there been any obstacles to tackle with Josh being involved in the sport? Yes. I think going back to the previous question about lifestyle, that's probably one of them, the shift in that and the time that it consumes. I suppose it's also taking on board when you are in a relationship with an athlete that is ultimately a huge chunk of their world. It's manageable, but there are times when it definitely gets stressful for Josh, and there are shifts within him because he's got a lot on his plate, especially when he was having the pressure more so of riding for a team and having to juggle a lot of people and other people's expectations as well as his own, which are huge anyway. Josh had quite a few injuries in the first few years that we were together. I saw him have some horrendous crashes. Not his worst, but some of them were pretty bad. So I think at one point he broke both his ankles, one after the other. One just healed, went out, broke the other one. I think there was a broken wrist as well. He's had a couple of operations too to help with things. So yeah, again, I would say those are obstacles because that's a time where in that instance, Josh is pulled away from what he loves, and as a partner, you are looking for things to kind of like fill that void until they're better and can get back to doing what really makes them happy and fuels their fire.
I think I was kind of around sort of the late 80s through the 90s into the sort of early 2000s. Thoroughly enjoyed the racing. The racing then was, especially sort of in the late 80s, early 90s, Britain was one of the strongest motocross nations outside of the USA. You know, we had probably 10 to 12 riders that were racing world championships that were within the top 10 in their respective classes. So it was a very strong era for British motocross, and I was very pleased that I was in that era. You know, my skills I kind of learnt in a foreign country. You know, I grew up in South Africa racing bikes over there, which is very much like the USA, and then brought those skills to the UK, and changed, I think, a lot of the younger riders rode then, because I was doing things that no one else was doing. So I think I left my mark on British motocross in that way. You know, when I retired from motocross, I was coaching, I was doing labouring jobs, I was trying to find something to do that A, to pay the bills, and B, that I enjoyed. And to be truthful, you know, I couldn't find anything that I really enjoyed doing, that I was passionate about. And a friend of mine was a stuntman, and I hadn't seen him for a long time, and I bumped into him, and he said to me, look, you should come and do some film work. You know, I can put you in contact with a guy. And I got a phone call from a stunt coordinator, Gary Powell, who was then filming one of the James Bond films, who said, you know, we'd like you to come and do some work for us, come and do some driving, car driving. Gradually, I started to become more interested in the camera side of things, especially the camera bikes, because back then, there weren't very many camera bikes around, and but people kept asking me about camera bikes, so I started to get very interested into it and started trying to figure out how I could build a camera bike to do what I needed it to do, and that's really got me to where I am now. And you know, I'm still on a bike, still on two wheels, and I still use a lot of the skills that I had from my racing days on the bikes that I ride now with cameras on. back in my early days, you trained off your own will. You know, there weren't trainers around, there weren't specific training programs, there weren't very many. I mean, there was the odd trainer, but most riders just kind of went to the gym, went for a run, did a bit of, you know, what they thought was right. Now there's specific programs. You look at America with the Baker Factory, and you know, there are places where you can go where you put through a rigorous training program. You do your motos, you put the time in. You know, they're trying to produce, you know, national champions. That's changed. Motocross has seen, you know, as a sport, as a high-profile sport. You know, not as high-profile as say basketball or baseball, but pretty high up there. If you ask anybody in the UK, I think the general public about motocross, most people still classify it as it's a sport for hooligans. It's a sport for kids who bunk out of school. You know what I mean? We're perceived as being, because we ride dirt bikes, we're perceived as being, you know, yeah, which is so wrong, so wrong.
I think the sport, from the average person's eyes, is full of hooligans, people up to no good. But if people was to come to this venue here in Northampton, VIP, and see it on a Saturday, Sunday, and see the families, and you know, sat around and everyone's enjoying themselves, and it's a family day out, really. You know, the dad might ride, the mum might ride, the sister might ride on the kids' track over there, and I just feel like that bit's missed. So you only have to sometimes flick on the news, and you'll potentially see someone, you know, on a stolen bike going through a park, or you know, these electric bikes now, which there's positives for electric technology, we'll touch on that, but now that people can go around the streets and, you know, not have fully licensed bikes and make no noise and go up and down the streets, that's kind of what people see, I think, in a negative light, which then makes it potentially council, shall we say, maybe have that image of it as well, which then has an impact on, there's not many facilities, people have to travel, which obviously costs more to travel an hour, 2 hours to where you need to go. I think it just all overlaps.
Yeah, there are a minority of people that abuse off-road bikes and, you know, ride around their neighbourhoods causing havoc, and especially these kids on these electric Cerons in town that steal phones and watches, stuff like that. That's given motocross, because it's still classified as dirt bikes. It gives off-road bikes a bad name. And when you look at what things like what Josh is doing with his training schools and the other lads out there training who are trying to educate, it's not just training the riders about the riding schools, you're educating the riders to a lifestyle, because riding motocross bikes and enjoying the sport that I've sort of enjoyed, it's a lifestyle. You know?
Nice. So, what have been the benefits or fulfillment of being a coach? What have you gotten out of that?
Just seeing progression, or making someone feel and look safer, and know that you've had input on the basic controls, because as we've touched on, the sport is extremely dangerous. Seeing a young rider, I've coached riders in the late 60s years of age, and just being able to make an impact for the good with any rider, it just gives you a nice feeling.
Definitely an old boy, nearly 62, coming up 62, and still trying to do it. But yeah, learning a few things today that I've actually never done before. For some reason or another, I've never back braked, tapped in the air. So Josh run that through me today. So with the clutch in, bang on the back brake, getting the front end to dip. That was really, really good. So Josh has got me scrubbing and soaking it up. And so I've learned quite a few bits today, as well as getting on the power 1 or 2 bike lengths earlier in the corners. So nearly 62, and I'm still trying to learn something.
Just being able to also find a career in something that you really enjoy is another nice feeling. Thinking, actually, this doesn't feel like work, you know, and the travel and meeting people in different countries. Iceland, Spain, quite a lot now, Isle of Man, just more local things, obviously Jersey. Meeting lots of like-minded people in large numbers is also really nice, you know, seeing what communities, seeing how different countries operate, and their, governing bodies get behind them and how they alter the tracks and, build tracks in a different way. Just having access through coaching to many different areas and meeting different people and cultures as well. So there's loads of nice things that have come as a result.